Hi, my name is Benedict. We are looking in this video at Sixth Dimension. It's a kind of a chorus reverby sort of thing. I will say right up front, it is designed to be like old analog gear, and I don't mean this modern idea of analog gear where you just... This is bulky. For any of you who've used my tape deco, you might have an idea. That unit is designed in such a way it's almost impossible to know what you're doing, but you'll get interesting results. This is much easier to know what you're doing, but you will get interesting, irregular, odd results, and things that you won't get in modern, perfectly engineered gear that is great when you want a sort of transparent see-through, but when you're looking for that kind of really rich, thick, touchable sort of sound, think like a Gary Newman record, you listen to a Vox Humana preset and you listen to a Gary Newman record, you're like, whoa, there's this whole extra thing. The name, obviously, as those of you aware enough would note, that it does pay homage to Dimension D, but in no particular way is it related. In certain ways it works very, very differently from Roland's Dimension D, but it does have some similarities in what it delivers, in the outcomes, the feel. Right, let's hear. Let's turn it out. And in. Now, to be fair, there's a 4 lines later and a looser running. So if we run, that's our raw sound. Very typical modern analog-ish sort of synth. Little hard, quite rigid. Fat, immense, warm. Huge amounts of movement, but it's not all predictable, which is a lot of what makes it so engaging. The extras that are added are looser, which quite simply just makes things go like this, and 4 lines later, which in this instance is adding one echo, a pair of echoes, and it's just extending that sound. Because I'm a firm believer that we shouldn't try to do things all in one spot. We should add a few layers and they compand each other. So while that addition is nice, we end up with that huge sound there. We might as well move straight into the manual section of the program. So we'll turn out the 4 lines later just so that we can really hear what we're doing. Firstly is to purchase. It is from my Ko-fi or coffee shop. Link will be down below. That's the only place you can get it. It's going to be really cheap. I'm assuming probably the same price as 4 lines later. Installation is pretty simple. You get a zip folder, download the zip folder. Inside that will be a Sixth Dimension folder. Simply grab that whole folder. Do not do anything with that folder, but grab it and put it into the folder where your VST3 devices live. Now, this is what's called a universal VST. For sure, it's working. You see it working here in Reason on Windows 11. In theory, it should work on a Mac, but I'm not going to guarantee that because I have had no feedback from anybody with regards to Mac at all, and that includes on the developer's side as well. Nobody seems sure, just by the fact that we're told it works. So I'd rather play cautious. On Windows, then your folder is Program Files, Common Files, VST3. In terms of support is only through conversation below on this video. Please do not send me private messages and this, that, and the other. This is for that support. Now we can move into the controls. It looks like a sort of echo unit, a sort of reverb unit, and it is both. But it functions primarily as chorus, echo, reverb, which lots and lots of my devices do because they're all so closely related. We've got our overview, so we've got our taps, which is our echoes. It says 6th dimension, so we've got pre-delay, which is 1. We've got 4, which are controlled in here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That one that creates the stereo essentially just doubles what we already had. So it's called 6th dimension because there are 6 taps, but really it ends up what you hear, and once you're working in stereo, is 10 taps, which is a fair amount, but it will behave quite differently. It will sound very different to that modern reverb, which is all... This has none of that kind of diffusion at all. It ends up with some of it, but there's none built in whatsoever. So you will hear a very tappy, clattery, rattly sort of a sound, which is a great way to get really big spaces without making the mix turn to this kind of strange gelatinous kind of... In terms of knobs, we will start with our taps, as I say. So we've really got 3 controls only on how we manage those. They've got offsets inside, which means that one knob manages pretty well everything. The first is quite simply just a pre-delay. So if we set up a more tap, tap, tap kind of a sound. Okay. We hear that pre-delay simply moves the whole signal backwards in time. Looking inside, the way that this is fed is the signal comes in, is sent to mono, goes straight through to the pre-delay, and then from there it populates the next 4, which populate 6th, which is our stereo maker. So yes, it's running in mono, but we're creating new stereo. If you're obsessed with that's not right, then there are bazillions of other devices which are true stereo and this, that, and the other. I don't love that approach to the world. We set our pre-delay, goes out to 100 milliseconds, so it's plenty there. And then we've got our size, which controls, as I say, the 4 taps in the middle. You can hear 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're not even. They're offset from each other. And then we've got the shape. Now, shape really is just telling us how they're fed. So when it's 100% to what we might call 0, everything is simply fed from the pre-delay alone. So you will find that it seems rather the same. Over on this side, everything is fed from the stage before it, meaning you can end up with this not much of anything. But the balance in between, this is where you're hearing a balance of pre-delay and of the tap that came before. So you end up with a more complicated signal. They are all set in level the same. So here you've got, let's just turn our stereo down. Hear how that sounds a little like a bouncing ball. They're all the same level. Here they roll off in time, so the 3rd, 4th, 5th echoes are getting quieter. Whereas here, it's the opposite. They get louder. In general terms, you might find that somewhere within this range is what you mostly want. That's a fairly normal halving in level, give or take, for each tap. This obviously is getting louder. So you can use this for more blooming rooms, and this for more traditional, gets quieter over time sort of a room. And then refeed. Now, it's called refeed, not feedback, even though it is actually feedback, but I really want to point out to remind people that this is taking everything from this point here and feeding it back into pre-delay. I did consider putting it on the end here, but then it kind of messes up our sections of what we're doing. But refeed is a total feedback, including the stereo here. So at this point, we've got, as I say, we're hearing 10 taps. We're feeding those 10 taps back into our pre-delay. And hear how it gets quite thick and even becomes smoother as time goes by. Be very careful with this feedback because it is total feedback, Jimi Hendrix feedback. Then it will howl. You will get it to start to self-oscillate fairly easily. There are some situations which is more likely to, but be very careful. Anything above the halfway mark is pushing yourself into danger territory, but you will get nice results out there. And remember, so if you want your room to seem larger overall, move your pre-delay out, and then move your size out, and smaller. Well, of course you can go quite small there, but with a big pre-delay. Each has its purposes. I know a lot of people turn off the pre-delay, but it's really not the wisest. You want to have a sense of separation between the sound and its bounce back. And as I say, that gives you that sense of where something lives in the world in which it is. So that's all our setting up the shape of our room. In no way is it meant to be highly controlled, and you will probably find it very weird to start with. But just play with the balance, and you will be surprised at what a nice result you can get. Modulation is a massive reason that this sounds or feels the way that it does. You might notice there's a button that says noise. We'll turn that off for the moment. We've got a fairly typical LFO. So LFO rate goes from very slow to definitely fast enough to be a bit silly. And then our depth amount. Most times you're going to want to have some of this, otherwise it will start to howl fairly quickly with the feedback. You've then got this option to add in noise. With it off, it's a fairly typical, oh yes, so you've got modulation going. Add this and it gets bird. And that's a really nice thing. A lot of those early devices I'm talking about, the early analog kind of stuff, the things that came before digital, and even some early digital, but the LFOs were, well, not the cleanest. And that meant that they gave rough movement and a far more interesting sort of result. As I said, this can be used as a sort of Gary Newmanizer, and a lot of that is because of the noise that it gives. So rather than being really perfectly even, try this on a smooth sound, string or pad or whatever, and you'll notice the real difference. It just adds this movement, which means that you don't end up with a polite kind of an LFO. So many modern echoes, multi-tap, multi-stage choruses and what have you, they've been very, very fussy and pedantic about making sure that the phases of all the oscillators, the LFOs, what have you, are all perfectly correct. This I deliberately said throw all of that away because I was so pleased with how the semi-random use of the single LFO worked in this, that each of those taps is related but sort of feels different because, yes, they're all running the same depth and the same rate, but they're all working at different, not mathematically precise at all, but just different, essentially all but random timings against each other. So sometimes they will go up and compound and get more pointy or lumpier. The whole idea with the things like Dimension Ds was that you end up with perfect offsets, so these 4 perfect offsets of the LFO. So you only end up with sort of that. So they actually sound a lot more like what we do now with unisons. And yes, they can be a beautiful sound, but they have a lot more complexity, movement, messed upness inside those LFOs than we do in a modern VST. This adds the combo of a messed upness and an unevenness to how that modulation is applied across all the taps. So you end up with a really rich LFO. Then we've got our tone controls. Let's turn this down. It can be a little glitchy as you move it. Don't know why. Don't really care. Possibly don't automate that as in use. There's not many situations, I think, in which you would need to do that. If you absolutely need to, then you can use other ways of doing that. By the time you get into that, you're probably wanting to use external EQs or what have you. Anyway, this will roll off 18 dB as a low shelf from 300-400 hertz. And remember, it's within the feedback loop. So if we've shaved off 3 dB here, then we're shaving off another 3 dB next time and another 3 dB next time, or what have you. It's effective. And the high end, again, does the same thing, minus 18 dB from 3 or 4K. So they can give you a very nice sort of feel. We've got our dry, we've got our wet, and the ability to, it looks like a bypass, literally all it does is turn the wet off. So it's not a total bypass, it's just a turn the wet off, hence being called on. If you wanted to keep your levels roughly even-steven, then you may consider this, but this will never give you an even-steven the same as this. But I don't believe in effects, especially of this variety, coming out at the same level as before. When you add chorus, you want to add sound. When you add reverb, you want to add sound. So the idea of the sound getting quieter as you add more stuff seems to me somewhat counterintuitive. I get the logical thing, but that's why God gave us gain controls or the fader. If you really got that issue where you've added too much here, then you can simply find your own way to rebalance or turn it down. There is this stereo. Now this stereo, quite unlike any of those things like Dimension Ds or the normal chorus, what they do is create stereo by, and my 2020 modulating delay does what I'm saying, it takes your LFO, turns it, meaning one side, the left-hand side goes up and down, the right-hand side goes the opposite, and that creates your feeling of stereo. This does not. This quite literally delays the whole right-hand channel. Some of you will be going, but that's harsh and that's evil and that's wrong. Yeah, when you've got tiny amounts, Haas can collapse poorly into mono, assuming that's really a real issue. But the reality here is that while you can give tiny amounts like that, you don't even move, see them not move, you can give this infinitesimally small amount, which I don't know how many milliseconds it's going to be. It's similar to a Haas, and okay, yeah, that might give you some phase cancellation issues, although this is so complex, it's not going to be anywhere near what you think. That ability to really make things bounce outside and in fairly extreme ways is a lot of that sense of, wow, that adds a whole other dimension, depth and space. So especially if we're reducing our can't hear because I'm in headphones. You never balance reverb in headphones, but hear how that becomes more immediate. So especially if you roll off a lot more of the high end, we've got that sense of it being further back in the room. So it gives you a lot of control with a pretty simple feature set. Understanding how it works, being able to think your way through, will get you an awful lot further than if you just go, but this doesn't do it the same way that everything else does. No, it does not. I actually very briefly had an echo unit. It might have been a bucket braid, but it was... Oof. It was very, very hard to get anything good out of it. When you did find something good, it was like, oh, that's pretty cool, except it hissed like an absolute bastard. This does not hiss. But that was a factor in my thinking of this, because there were certain things about that nasty, nasty echo unit that were good. And as I say, like Gary Newman records, things of that vintage, the stuff that they were using just gives something that we don't get past that. So that's it. Very simple controls, but remember, everything relates to everything else. We're not trying to say that this is going to sound like a Valhalla. This is like the complete opposite of a Valhalla. But we can create either spaces, echoes, by modulating the noise adds a richness to that we don't normally have. And then we can control how wide we go in stereo, remembering that this is quite literally echoing all of this, including tone controls and everything, and delaying it on the right hand channel. So it's doubling the number of taps that we've got, which is different from the way that most reverbs do it. And you get a very interesting result when you do that. Have fun with it. This is not going to behave the same, but it's going to give you some really interesting results, especially when you layer it up with things like this. Let's drop this into the bass register. It's probably not going to be the first thing that you reach for on incredibly tight basses or on drums, but even there you'll be amazed how nicely these sorts of things do work, especially when you're feeding them into something else. Right, so the important thing is get out there, have fun. If there are genuine questions or you want to show off something really cool where this is significant in the mix, all down below. Get out there, have a great day.